Gentlemen, and now we'll recognize two members for questions, and then we will go to the next panel. Mr. Graves from Missouri.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to follow up on my statement earlier, and I didn't want to step on the chairman because he had to go to the meeting, but given the state of the economy and what I had mentioned earlier about the problems we're seeing, and obviously the attitude towards general aviation, and thank goodness the provision was pulled that any company that receives federal dollars would have to sell their private aircraft, which is something that concerned me. And I guess this question would be maybe for Mr. Bolen, possibly for Mr. Fuller, but I know from Mr. Bolen because you represent the Business Aviation Association. I mean, can you expand a little bit on what kind of impact that would have on an entire industry if a provision like that? And I know there are companies out there selling aircraft just because of the perception that's going on, which concerns me.
Well, Congressman, you talked about the attitude that was at the heart of the divestiture idea, and I believe that that is an attitude that is based on a caricature of business aviation that is totally unrepresentative of the community. The reality is that it is not only unrepresentative, it's also very dangerous for our community. Business aviation is about jobs, manufacturing, and service. It's about a lifeline to small communities, and you've talked about that yourself. And it's about allowing companies to be productive. And I think that the reality is that there may be times when business aviation isn't appropriate for all missions. But let's be clear about something. Business aviation is prudent and cost-effective in a huge number of operations. It's prudent and it's cost-effective when the community you're trying to reach has no commercial service. It's prudent and cost-effective when you're trying to do multiple sites in a single day. And it's prudent and it's cost-effective when you've got products that cannot be carried aboard the commercial airlines or shipped. And it's prudent when you've got a team of people that have to quickly get somewhere and they need to discuss proprietary information en route. Or if there is a team that needs to work together to plan a presentation and be there. Those are times when business aviation makes sense. It makes up 99% of the operations. It's critical to our nation's air transportation system. It's critical to our nation's job space. And I appreciate very much the work of so many people on this committee who have taken the time to speak out about the importance of business aviation, not just to their districts, but to this country. And thanks to the hard work of people like you and others on this committee, we were able to turn that around. But we'd ask that you continue to speak out on that.
Thanks. Mr. Fuller.
I would just add that we looked on Election Day last year at the question in a survey that suggested that almost two-thirds of the people responded that general aviation, as defined as non-military, non-scheduled carrier, was an important part of the nation's transportation system. And I think one of the reasons that I looked with some horror at the singling out of certain individuals or certain practices by companies was I think the vast majority of the American people in community after community recognize that general aviation does play an important role. I know we're committed to sharing that story more broadly, but I actually think there's a base there that supports not only what we believe, but what you've fought for, and we're going to continue to carry that message out there.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Seemed like I think maybe expected a little discussion about who's paying for what, but Mr. Bolen, would you respond? The airlines claim the business aviation not paying its fair share in the trust fund. How do you respond?
Well, the FAA numbers indicate that business aviation, which is part of the general aviation community, the entire general aviation community is currently paying about 8.5% of the revenues going into the trust fund. If general aviation were grounded tomorrow, I believe that the system may be 7 to 9% less expensive than it is today. That's based on a 1997 cost allocation study done by the FAA, so I think we're in the ballpark. I also would say that Mr. May referenced the FAA's cost allocation study, and as this subcommittee knows, questions have been raised about the methodology and some of the applications that were used in that. Cost allocation is certainly not an exact science, but reputable groups have raised concerns, and I think those should be explored.